What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I've got a relatively quick one, but hopefully one that teaches you something new, and hopefully one that some of you guys can take away some information from. Based on the title and thumbnail, today's video is going to be a very simple, a very basic PACMAN Frog Care Guide. We will not be going into a huge amount of depth on setting up this frog, just a basic setup for the basic sort of care and needs that you will need for your PACMAN frog. PACMAN frogs are some of the best beginner frogs, if not the best beginner frogs, especially because they don't require a lot of space, they don't require a huge amount of upkeep and maintenance, and ultimately, they're just cool to look at. First of all, where do PACMAN frogs get their names from? Well, if you look at a PACMAN frog, abnormally fat and round bodies, you will see where they get the name Pac-Man. Just like the character in the arcade game Pac-Man, PACMAN frogs look a lot alike. Not only are they fat and colorful most of the times, but they also have very wide mouths like Pac-Man. Now, I have a decent amount of experience keeping PACMAN frogs here in the reptile room, but at the moment I only have one. And if we go into this tub, we open it up, look at who we have chilling right there. Look at that big boy. So that is actually a big ol' male albino Pac-Man. As you can see, he is just chilling right now in his enclosure. Now, this enclosure is basically his selling enclosure because this frog is, well, he's actually for sale. So if you guys want to buy him, just, hit me up on my Instagram down below. So normally I would be keeping him in something like a 10-gallon tank, but right now he's in these tubs until he is sold. So we know a little bit about how PACMAN frogs get their name, but where do they come from? Well, PACMAN frogs, like many other amphibians, are found throughout Central and South America. So these frogs spend most of their time in marshes, swampy areas, areas with lots of mud, lots of water, that they can kind of just sit, absorb the water, then go and burrow into some dirt. They do not do very much. PACMAN frogs are very, very stationary frogs, which means, of course, they just kind of sit in one spot. They wait for food to kind of pass by them, and as food does so, well, they eat it. So that brings me to my next point. What size tank should you have for your PACMAN frog? Bare minimum for a PACMAN frog, an adult male, I recommend a 10-gallon tank as a keeper setup. So if you're keeping your pet PACMAN for the rest of his life, bare minimum a 10-gallon tank, which that is what this is right here. But you could always go larger into something like a 20-gallon tank if you really want to spoil your frog. But something like this is actually a really good example of how you could set your PACMAN frog up. You've got a nice little LED light, not producing too much heat. You've got your lid, of course, so that your frog can't get out. You've got some plants, some other decor, a hide for the frog to burrow into, and a good sized water bowl. Another thing with PACMAN frogs, not only do you want a 10-gallon tank, but you want a lot of substrate. I recommend about 4 to 5 inches, so you may want to go a little bit higher on the substrate, just because since they are a burrowing species, they're going to burrow into that substrate and kind of chill in it. But the next question is, what kind of substrate should you use? Well, as far as substrate goes, you've got a huge variety of options for PACMAN frogs. So things like Eco-Earth, Repti Soil, Zilla Jungle Mix, or even moss. All of those options are great options to keep PACMAN frogs. You can also mix these substrates. So if you wanted to mix, say, Repti Soil with Eco-Earth, you could do that as well. Personally, what I find best if you're just setting up a plain setup for a PACMAN frog is to mix Repti Soil and then put a little bit of sphagnum moss on top. They'll kind of burrow into that moss layer to where they're sitting right on top of the dirt. That moss will hold humidity and keep your frog moist. And then in certain times when they're about to shed, they can burrow into the dirt as well. Like if we take a look at this guy, you can see his substrate has got some leaves on top that he kind of burrows into, and then it's just a straight dirt substrate. This is actually Repti Soil and Jungle Mix that I mixed in here into his enclosure, and that's what he kind of burrows into. Now, another very important thing to consider when keeping a PACMAN frog is heating and lighting. Like I said, using this enclosure as our representation, lighting isn't super specific. I just keep a small LED light bulb on there just to kind of brighten up the enclosure, help your frog look a little bit more pretty, and give him a day and night cycle. But as far as heating goes, I do recommend that you keep your PACMAN frog around 78 to 80 degrees on one side of the enclosure and on the cooler side, it can be anywhere from 72 to 75. Here in the reptile room, thanks to all of these enclosures here, it usually just stays about 78 degrees in here, and then of course it's kind of humid just because of, once again, all the enclosures. But say you have 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 enclosures and you don't have a huge reptile room like I do, then you're definitely going to want to add a heat pad and thermostat onto your enclosure. Now, as far as humidity goes for your PACMAN frog, you can add a fogger, you can add an automatic misting system, but if you have just one frog, the easiest thing to do is to get a spray bottle. I use like those giant pest control sprayers that you can find at Lowe's or Home Depot. I use those to spray all of my cages down. If you just have one frog, you can use a smaller hand pump sprayer, and you're going to spray your PACMAN frog about once or twice a day. You want his humidity to stay at 70 to 80%. So you want your PACMAN frog's humidity to stay quite high because of course it is a frog. You don't want him to dry out, and these guys are also native to South America where it stays humid constantly. Oh, and one other little suggestion or tip I will give you guys is if you have one of those screened lids, like those ugly metal screen lids, and it lets out a lot of humidity, just wrap it with saran wrap and that'll help hold in a lot of humidity. Just try that out. Now, another very important thing to cover when it comes to having a PACMAN frog is what kind of decor, what kind of water bowl, what kind of hide, what kind of plants, what kind of stuff like that should you use for your frog. I really minimum recommend a hide and a water bowl. You can add fake plants or live plants. You can also add other pieces of wood, rock, and really deck it out how you like. But in all honesty, as long as you have enough dirt and a good hide and a good water bowl, that's going to be plenty for your PACMAN frog. And then like I said, as far as plants go, you can use live plants, fake plants, it doesn't really matter. Next thing's next. What on earth are you going to feed this frog? I will tell you this, PACMAN frogs have a very, very voracious and aggressive diet. So definitely make sure you keep up with feeding your frog. You're going to feed them things like crickets, doobie roaches. When it gets to the right size, you can even feed them mice and other various insects. Make sure, of course, the insects aren't too small for the frog. I usually recommend the width of its mouth. The only thing is PACMAN frogs have super wide mouths, so I would say about half of the width of the PACMAN frog's mouth. First of all, when you go to feed your PACMAN frog, on occasion, you're going to have to give it different vitamins and supplements. A couple that I really recommend is calcium powder. Calcium powder is super important. It's very beneficial for their bone development, and you're only going to give them the calcium powder about once, maybe twice a week. And then you're also going to give them some sort of vitamin supplement, or what I personally like is the Repashy vitamin supplement. It works really, really well, and the frogs seem to enjoy it. Definitely make sure you give your frogs supplements, guys. I highly recommend it. It seems to help the frogs live longer. It's just ultimately better. So definitely give your frogs some supplements. Treat your water. So if you use regular sink water, there's a lot of chlorines and chloramines that can actually be harmful for your frog. So I recommend treating the water or using bottled water, distilled water, things like that. Another very important thing, what are you going to do when your frog poops in its enclosure and it starts to get dirty? So personally, I recommend you clean your frog's entire enclosure out once a month, unless it's in a bioactive setup. If your PACMAN frog happens to be in a bioactive setup, that's a totally different story and a totally different video. But if you're not setting up your frog in any sort of fancy enclosure, you're definitely going to want to change out that old dirty dirt every month or so, and then clean the enclosure. You can use Dawn dish soap to clean the enclosure. You can use Zilla terrarium cleaner. You can use water and vinegar solutions. Any of those will work just fine. But never, ever, ever use bleach. Don't use bleach. Don't use pine sol. Don't use Fabuloso. None of that, because all of that can be harmful to your frog and its skin. Because, like I said, PACMAN frogs have delicate skin, and you don't want to irritate their skin or kill them. So all in all, to kind of sum everything up, enclosure size, I recommend minimum 10 gallons. You want a lot more flat space. You don't need a huge amount of height. They're not going to climb very much. As far as lighting and heating goes, like I said, a heat pad with a thermostat to put your frog at 78 to 80 degrees will work just fine. Humidity wise, you want them to sit about 75 to 80%. Bedding wise, I highly recommend a very loose dirt-like substrate. Like I said, you can also use moss, leaf litter, any of that stuff will work just fine. As far as decor, hides, water bowls, that sort of stuff goes, you can makeshift your own stuff. You can go and buy stuff at pet stores, pet shows, that sort of stuff. As far as cleaning, like I said, you can use a vinegar and water solution. You can use Dawn dish soap. Whatever you use, just make sure you rinse it out and there's no remnants of it left in the enclosure. And then as far as diets and supplements, I recommend giving your frog calcium powder on occasion and some sort of frog or reptile multivitamin. Then of course you're going to feed your frog different sorts of insects, on occasion pinky mice, things like that. These frogs eat a lot. I recommend feeding them every 3 to 4 times a week. That way they can get the proper diet. Oh, and yes, PACMAN frogs do have teeth. With all that being said, guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this quick little PACMAN frog care video, care tutorial, whatever you want to call it. If y'all think I should do more care videos, go ahead and let me know down in the comments, because I can always do care videos. I've got a lot of animals as well that I can do care videos on. And with that being said, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Follow my Instagram if you want to buy that frog, because I do have that frog for sale, the one that you've been seeing on this video. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. We're on the road to 6,000 subscribers. Guys, thank y'all so much for the support. It means a lot. I can't even express it. And without further ado, I will see you all in the next one. Peace!
Yeah, sunny days, sunny days, sunny days. No clouds in the sky, but I get away. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Sunny day, make way. All the stress and
Repty rock bowls. You. Oh.